A lot of the gums you find in the market are made from petroleum. So it's the same things you make plastic out of. Some people refer to it as plastic gum. It has arguably the same amount of plastic as a plastic straw. The benefit from xylitol, especially for dental health, so it tricks the bad bacteria. It thinks it's carbohydrates, ingests it, but then it's not, and it actually disrupts it. Effectively, it leads to cell death.
What is the level of research that we have for xylitol?
There's a lot of research on xylitol. The research was around 4 to 6 grams need to be chewed 3 times a day, and the xylitol in many other products is so small that you're just not going to get those benefits.
Stephen Davis is the founder of a chewing gum company called Kaigum. This is a chewing gum that I've been using for the last 6 months, and I can absolutely recommend it, which is why I'm very excited to have Stephen on this episode to talk more about what's exactly in this gum and why it has benefits for your oral health and how it stands out from other types of gums out there. The difference between having a natural gum base and the benefits of xylitol for your oral health. Don't forget, as always, you can listen to this episode on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Thanks for watching, and let's get straight into the episode. Stephen Davis.
Stephen.
What is Kaigum and why did you start it?
Yeah, so first and foremost, Kaigum is a chewing gum. That's what it is, but it's a chewing gum with a bit of a different to your normal brands of chewing gum. Firstly, the chewing gum that we made from is a natural gum base, which is from tree sap, whereas the other gum brands, which you're probably familiar with, they're made from petroleum base. The other key element that we are specifically designed is for health benefits, which a lot of chewing gums aren't really marketed in that way. They kind of seem more as like a breath freshener or something sweet. So Kaigum is all about health, primarily dental health. So that's quite important as well. So the ingredients play into that as well.
And what led you up to starting that company?
Yeah, so to cut a very long story short, because we could spend an hour talking about that story, effectively I just stumbled across an article about chewing gum and noticed there was a lot of health benefits that was quite a shock to me. I basically looked into it more and more, and I noticed that there was about 20 odd research benefits. There's loads of research. If you go to PubMed, you'll see tons and tons of these research articles and all about chewing gum that go back all the way to the 70s. So really, in terms of where that led me to, I looked into the marketplace. I saw that the gums available are either from these using very questionable ingredients. They have made from petroleum gum base. They have things like artificial sweeteners like aspartame and ACE-K, and these artificial enhancers and preservatives. So I noticed there was a bit of a gap in the market, that no one's really serving that and making the most and making people aware of all of these benefits of chewing gum. So that's where the idea kind of originally came from.
Lovely. Okay, so a gap in the market.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple of aspects. I mean, there's quite a lot of aspects actually to Kaigum. Let's start with the chewing aspect. So you've obviously gone into the business of chewing gum. And you mentioned that there's some benefits there. What are some of the benefits of chewing in itself that you found?
So the chewing, ignoring the specific ingredients, which I'm sure we'll come on to, the chewing mechanism has been found to have a lot of side benefits. So in terms of oral health, where that comes into play, and I used to categorize it into a few different benefits, which is oral health, neurological, gastrointestinal, and some areas of immunity. But if we're focusing on the oral health, what the mechanism of chewing, what that's been found to do is increase saliva flow by about 12 to 14 times. And saliva's really quite a miracle for us. It's there for a reason. We just think it's for salivation, but it keeps our mouths dry, keeps it lubricated, and it delivers essential minerals to our teeth, because our teeth go through this constant process of demineralization and remineralization, these essential minerals that keep the enamel strong. So that's why saliva is very important. Now, the mechanism of chewing gum, why it's been found to be so good after meals, is because when we have these foods, a few times a day, we're feeding the bad bacteria in the mouth. And when this bad bacteria proliferates, it creates plaque, and that's the thing that creates acids, which causes tooth decay. So if you were to chew, you increase their saliva flow. The saliva has a few mechanisms. Number one, it can wash the food particles away. Number two, it increases the saliva flow of those essential minerals, so it helps remineralize them. And then it also rebalances the pH in your mouth as well. So what would be an acidic environment, which creates the environment for tooth decay, it then rebalances this. And this is an important point as well. If you're worried about dental health after chewing, best thing is not to brush your teeth, because what that does is it brushes away the soft enamel because it's an acidic environment. So that's the more oral health. There are other benefits that have been found, which are because of the mechanism of it. If you've seen football managers, they're constantly chewing. It's been linked to a reduced perception of stress. I don't know. They don't quite know how it works, but it's also found that increases focus, things like academic performance in exam situations, helps relieve tiredness short term. So if you're driving, they sometimes recommend chew gum. The mechanism of chewing gum as well, it's linked to reducing the effects of acid reflux because of that increased saliva flow. So there's tons and tons of benefits for the chewing mechanism itself.
Yeah, it's interesting because I never thought of chewing gum being a healthy thing or having any benefits until I came across Kaigum. So that would then, in essence, mean that any chewing gum you have will have those benefits that you specifically spoke about then. Right. So then what makes Kaigum stick out amongst the rest? I know you mentioned a couple of things earlier, but can you go into that in a bit more detail?
Yeah, and I love the pun as well. The sticking out is
yeah. Didn't even notice. No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. So the primary, you're exactly right. So you could go for these main brands of gums and those benefits would be found because it's the mechanism of chewing. Where Kaigum stands out is, number one, its ingredients. So we focus on very high quality ingredients. Like I said, the natural gum base. A lot of the gums you find in the market are made from petroleum. So it's not necessarily that there's increased benefits from the chewing mechanism. It's the fact that we've focused on very high quality ingredients, which is very important for me. Like I said, it doesn't have those artificial sweeteners, which some people are quite wary of. There's been tons of news out there. I'm sure you've seen them about aspartame and ACE-K and preservatives. So that's what you typically find with the larger brands of gum. So that's probably the first part, the focus on high quality ingredients. And second is we're enriched very highly with a natural derived sweetener called xylitol. So you do find traces of xylitol in main brand gums because they can say that they have xylitol, but the benefit from xylitol, especially for dental health, has to be very large amounts of xylitol in there. So we have typically larger pieces of gum to get the maximum amount in there. So those two things, it's the quality of the ingredients that makes us stand out, that we're focused on natural, good quality stuff, but also the high levels of xylitol.
Mm-hmm. And so let's go into more in detail with xylitol then. And when I came across xylitol and the benefits of xylitol, it broke some of the perceptions I had and beliefs I had about sweeteners, because I generally put sweeteners in a category of this is too good to be true. We know that there's quite a lot of research suggesting that it's probably got some bad health effects to it. And some people will say, and I would agree, that sometimes if something's too good to be true, often it isn't. And what's interesting about xylitol is that is very sweet and it tastes very nice, and you're not getting any of the downsides of sugar. So what are some of the benefits of xylitol specifically, and then how does it work in regards to oral health?
Yeah, so the primary benefit why xylitol's been particularly lauded is for dental health, and I can go into that in a minute. The other areas are that it has lower levels of calories than sugar, and it also doesn't spike blood sugar levels. So people can have it on a ketogenic diet, and they can have it while they're fasting without breaking their fast. And also the Diabetic Society has said that it's a potential alternative for people to have as a sweetener. So the main benefit, which is primarily talked about, is dental health. The story behind that is that it's a sweetener that comes from Finland. that was found, I think, in the late 1800s. But during World War II, because of the embargoes and the sugar shortages, they had to find an alternative. And they have an abundance of birch trees. And this is where typically xylitol came from. So they started using this as an alternative in sugars, and they start noticing in things like candies and gums that people who had that quite a lot, they had a lower incidence of dental caries or tooth decay. So they started researching into it more and more, and they found that the mechanism of xylitol, the way it works is, let me take a step back first. The way that plaque works, so we brush our teeth off every day because of plaque, so it builds up, and plaque is always there. What happens is this bad bacteria adheres to our teeth on the plaque, and that's the stuff we need to brush away. That creates acids, which then causes tooth decay and has a whole plethora of other problems as well. What xylitol does is it disrupts that bad bacteria, the mutant streptococci. So the bad bacteria, it feeds off carbohydrates. So what that happens is when they feed off the carbohydrates, that's why when we eat and drink particular foods, acidic foods, or juices, smoothies, those are feeding the bad bacteria, which then proliferate, they grow, they stick to our teeth, and that's where the problem starts. What xylitol does is it's how it's formed. Its mechanism is a 5-carbon rather than 6-carbon. 6-carbon is carbohydrates, so it tricks the bad bacteria. It thinks it's carbohydrates, ingests it, but then it's not, and it actually disrupts its reproductive cycle and how it grows, and that's what the science is behind it effectively. So it's tricking, thinking it's sugars and carbohydrates when it's actually not.
Just wanted to stop the episode just for 1 second. If you are enjoying this episode, then please can you help me by hitting that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're watching on Spotify, then please hit that follow button. It really, really helps this show, helps me to make even better episodes and get better guests on. Thank you so much for watching. Let's get straight back to it. And so what happens then when it does? So essentially, so with bacteria, it will feed on the sugar, and that will then make it grow, which will then lead to cavities. So with xylitol, it also feeds on it, but because it's a 5-carbon rather than 6-carbon, does that mean it just dies? Because what happens to the bacteria then?
So it's primarily the bad bacteria. It can't reproduce, so it disrupts its cycle. This is the science behind it, and I think there perhaps needs to be somewhat more research behind it. But effectively, it leads to cell death. So it can't proliferate, and that's the thing. We're creating, once we eat and drink, it's creating billions and billions of these bacteria, the bad bacteria in our mouth. There's tons of different bacteria within our mouth, which is important, which is why we talk about the oral microbiome. But the bad bacteria in particular is the thing that would eat the carbohydrates, which then grows. So,
and what about the good bacteria then? Does it interact with that at all in a negative way?
Yeah, good question. So the research that has been done, it doesn't have a net benefit for it, but it's been found that it doesn't have a negative consequence either.
Okay, so you're effectively reducing the bad bacteria in the mouth and not touching the good bacteria.
Correct.
Because that can be sometimes the downside about other things, that you just get rid of all the bacteria, like antibiotics, of course, is the main issue with antibiotics. It's not very specific, is it? Okay, so the source of xylitol is important as well. Can you explain more on that?
Yeah, so, I mean, xylitol is xylitol at the end of the day. We believe it is important. So ours comes from birch tree, which is considered a bit more sustainable. It isn't GM crops. That's where a lot of it is. A lot of the xylitol out there is sourced. Xylitol can come from many different sources. You can find it. Birch tree is the one that's probably the most well known, but you can find it in corn. You can also find it in things like berries. It's tiny trace amounts in things like mushrooms. Human body even synthesizes about a certain amount. It creates a certain amount every day as well. It's been found. So ours comes from the birch tree, which is sourced in the Nordics. But a lot of xylitol out there as well is imported from China. And again, it comes down to personal preference. For some people, they would prefer not to have that because it can be seen as a bit more questionable. The source, is it truly GM? And yeah, some people are quite averse to that. So we just keep it safe and keep it to treated birch.
Yeah, there's a lot of foods that I'm learning about recently that have historically been faked, and there's a lot of foods that, for example, honey and olive oil and many other types of foods that are very common. And it now makes me very, very wary about where I get my stuff from. Because not only can it be faked, but it can be replaced with things that are just so much worse. So it's quite refreshing to know that, like a company like Kaigum, that you're actually sourcing good quality ingredients. Because one of the problems about when you're combining health and business is that within business, you're trying to cut your costs, increase your margins. But to prioritize that is also a really important thing. So with xylitol, quite often sometimes things come with a cost. And so is there a cost to xylitol that we know of? Is there any downsides to xylitol as a sweetener?
Yeah, primarily, some people need to be a bit careful with the volume they're consuming. So it's been advised to have less than 30 grams a day because it can interfere with the digestive process. Some people with IBS are very sensitive to it as well, because it's the way that we metabolize it and interacts in the lower gut. So it can be, that's something to be wary of. If you have a very sensitive stomach, if you've also been advised to avoid FODMAPs, those are the things that you should generally, it's probably not advisable. I would also say for most people, try to stick to 4 pieces of gum a day. That's within about 6 grams of Kaigum. So to get to the levels where you are affecting your body, it can have some bad side effects for your stomach. I won't go into the details, but you can imagine that you would have to have about, I think, 15 or 20 pieces of gum a day, and we recommend 4 pieces to get all the benefits. So because it's such a small level, it's okay. The other one thing to make very, very clear is it's keep away from dogs, and we make it very clear on our packaging. Dogs, the way I explained earlier how xylitol works and its chemical compound, dogs can't handle that. So the liver, the mechanism works. It's called hypoglycemia. So the dog just can't process it. So it leads to hypoglycemia, which can lead to death. So even small amounts of it. So this is why you've got to be vigilant. That's why we keep it in packaging the way we do, and comes in the tin. And we recommend to everyone keep it away from dogs if you do have a dog.
What is the level of research that we have for xylitol? I've seen, in particular on your website, there's quite a lot of different research papers that seem to have very positive results on it. What's the quality of research we have for that?
Yeah, so if you go to the website, we've included quite a lot there. As you noticed, there is, like any research, it can be questionable. The gold standard is a randomized control study, where you basically using human trials, and rather than in a test tube somewhere where you've got no other instance. So there's one article we do include where it compares all the research out there, and it rates the quality of that. So to your first point, there's a lot of research on xylitol, and this is why there's been a lot of benefits found, but also the quality of the research out there. There is some very, very high quality. There's a lot of time and money has been invested into finding those outcomes. The other thing to make very clear is, in the UK and Europe, we have a very, very strict laws around labeling and labeling benefits, and that has to go through a committee of scientific review, and they have to review the research out there and say, is this actually something we can state is a benefit? And there's only 250 health claims that can be made within the UK and the European Union related to food products. I mean, it's even things like, you could say, calcium supports bone health. It comes down to stuff like that. One of the things we can't, which shocked me the most, is we cannot say caffeine gives you energy. So these caffeine containing drinks, that's why you find these loopholes. Things like Red Bull says Red Bull gives you wings. It doesn't say Red Bull gives you energy. But yeah, I digress. So the research that's been out there there's a significant amount of it. and it's also been peer reviewed quite a lot of times as well.
So let's go into the other ingredients of Kaigum. So we've spoken about, you mentioned briefly about the tree sap in as opposed to having the petroleum based basis for the gum, and then the xylitol. What other ingredients are in there, and are the benefits of those ingredients for oral health as well?
Yeah, so we're talking when we talk about Kaigum, it's primarily its net weight. I think 95% of it is the gum base, the chewing gum, which is from tree sap, and the xylitol itself. So that's why we have about 75. It's a lot of our net weight is actually xylitol that you find within the gum itself. The other things within there are going to be the natural flavorings, the things to basically help it kind of become more palatable in terms of the shape, the consistency, but it's all kind of naturally derived. So you have so you have, for example, vegetable glycerol, the gum arabic, and the carnauba wax. They're all basically, carnauba wax is for that crunchy coating, which is quite satisfying. But yeah, these are all tree derived ingredients as well. So they wouldn't necessarily have the net benefit, but it's more the consumer benefit from the enjoyment of the consistency and how it chews and what it tastes like.
So it's primarily the action of chewing and then the xylitol that are giving majority of the benefits. So
yeah, I mean, I did consider, and it may be something in the future where you could have active ingredients, but the main thing that we're standing for and it is down to the action of chewing and the xylitol. There are gums out there that can sometimes contain vitamins and minerals and things to market itself better. I mean, there is some also caffeinated gums out there for energy rather than having an energy drink. But I think that the benefit found from just chewing and having a clean product with the xylitol, I think stands enough for just focusing on those minimal ingredients in there.
Yeah, you may actually advertise, or you may actually exclude certain people if they don't like those other ingredients, which is obviously the
correct.
Downside,
Kids as well. I think that if you're thinking about vitamins and minerals, you've got to be very, very careful with what children's are consuming. It's not something I'd prefer to get into. Well, maybe in the future someday someone will pull this up in several years' time and be like, oh, you said this. So it may be, but it would take a lot of time and effort and research to make sure that if we do bring something to market, it's all kind of safe for whoever to chew.
So if oral health is the number one benefit of Kaigum, what would you put in number two?
I think we touched on it, the neurological. There's a lot of research out there that it can support neurological. We don't talk about it too much because there isn't that level of body research that has been with the oral health. But yeah, the thing there's some really crazy research out there, some that was found. So it used to be included in rations within World War II. The US Army had it, and the belief was it can help the perception of stress. And as I mentioned earlier, football managers have it. And there's been research that was done in a control group of students who chewed gum and students that didn't chew gum. And the students who generally chewed gum performed better in tests. So that, I'd say the neurological side of things is probably something, but it's not, there isn't a huge body of research. And we found that some people that were chewing it, they kind of said, well, I didn't really find that my focus was better. I like it when I have to do some monotonous tasks to just chew gum. It helps me get through it and keeps me kind of focused. But yeah, I would say second neurological, and then third is probably the more gastrointestinal benefits as well. So there was some research out there, and it hasn't had tons and tons of research done on it, but there was things found that it in one case it helped relieve the symptoms of nausea after certain surgery better than it did pharmaceuticals delivered by intravenous drips. So the patients that were chewing gum found the relief of nausea to be quicker and more potent than having an intravenous drip with pharmaceuticals delivered to it. Again, it was one piece of research, so you've got to take that with somewhat of a pinch of salt. The one that I say most, which shocks is there was the British. It was a paper published in the Journal of British Surgery, and it was that it found that by chewing gum after certain surgeries, it increased the recovery time. So it was less complications of that. Again, it was one piece of research, and that's why we focus mainly on the oral health, because there's far more research behind it.
And the benefits of the gastrointestinal, is that primarily, do you think, because of the saliva production?
Yeah, there is. So, for example, the acid reflux that I mentioned earlier, that's because you're constantly taking small bits of saliva down, so it helps relieve that on there. Because I was thinking, well, why can't you just gulp some water and then it will relieve it? But it's more the continuous, that swallowing motion that helps it go down, and also the saliva. There was other mechanisms as well, that the activation of the vagus nerve. So your vagus nerve is one of your largest nerves. It's called the wandering nerve. It's the nerve. It's a large nerve that connects your stomach to your brain. It's very important in regulating many things like heart rate and the digestive process. And some research out there has found that it helps activate the vagus nerve through a chemical called CCK. I'm going to try and pronounce it for you. Cholecystokinin, I think.
Sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, sounds about right. Something scientific.
They always make these, it's the same with medications. They make the names so complicated you can't pronounce or remember them.
Yeah, so there was some research that found that chewing gum increases that. I'm not sure whether... I did look into it. It wasn't clear whether the CCK helped activate the vagus nerve or the vagus nerve create the CCK, and that's what relates to the helping of after surgeries as well, those colorectal surgeries. But there's I think there's lots of different things. I don't think in that scenario it was just the saliva. I think also you could think about the chewing, the swallowing motion. I mean, again, it's not tons and tons of research out there, so that's why I take it with a pinch of salt. And that's why we focus very much on the oral health, because there's loads and loads of research out there. It's been very well documented, and it's shown to have very, very strong net benefits as well.
What about some of the environmental impacts of Kaigum? Because you've concentrated a little bit on that as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. So that's been a very strong thing that I focused on. There are gum brands out there which are focusing on, it's not plastic, so it's good for the environment. It's something that I feel very, very strongly about, but you don't make it as big a noise about it. I think it's something that all brands should just be focusing on. The environmental impact is primarily because of the gum base. So being, as I mentioned before, most gums out there made from petroleum. So it's the same things you make plastic out of. Some people refer to it as plastic gum. So it has arguably the same amount of plastic as a plastic straw. So this is much more difficult to break down. It can take hundreds and hundreds of years. So there's a few, obviously many negative consequences of the decomposition of it. Whereas with natural gum, it's tree sap. So I was asked this, how long does it take to decompose? I mean, you can probably bury it and it will disappear within a few months. It's a natural product. If you chew it and then you put it on the side, and I did this experiment, I wouldn't recommend that to many people because it's pretty disgusting. But if you chew it, leave it on the side, you'll see it completely changes. So it ends up looking like sap. That's important. So the decomposition element of it, but also the sourcing element of it. The way in which it's sourced is almost similar to tree sap, maple syrup. Sorry. So I did a video about it on the Instagram. Kai.gum if anyone's interested. So there's the way in which it's sourced is within Central America. These guys called chicleros. So they effectively climb up a tree. They go in and they climb up the tree and they tap it. So they put slits into it. I think we're okay on They put slits into it, and then the gum, the sap, comes down. And they can only do that every 7 years, so it doesn't affect the tree. So then it could be retapped after several years. So very similar to maple syrup, that doesn't affect the tree itself.
Does that make it quite expensive? Because maple syrup is very expensive. Is it more expensive to get the tree sap rather than the petrol based?
Yes, I think that it is somewhat cheaper. I think it's easier, and I think the main reason why many big brands, I don't need to mention who. I'm sure we're all familiar with who they are. They like petroleum is because it's far more consistent as a base. Whereas tree sap, it does have implications like it can't be near heat, so it's very affected by heat. Also, some people found that if you've got dentures or something, some people found that it sticks to the teeth, which isn't very pleasant. So they've kind of avoided it. So there's actually quite a glut of supply there. I guess you could argue that it's the price does have an implication as well on it. So it is more expensive. But I think it's a price willing to pay.
Yeah, you of course pay for quality, don't you? And I get the impression as well that people are more willing to do that nowadays, is pay a little bit more to get a better quality, because I think some of the products we've been having for quite a long time, we're starting to learn more about some of the issues with it. I don't know if it was just because in the past they didn't really know what these companies were doing, or probably that combined with the fact that they didn't really know the health issues with that. But again, it comes down to cutting costs, isn't it?
That's it. Yeah, I think cutting costs, and also, as I mentioned, big organizations need consistency, that every single product is going to be uniform. It's going to be the same. There's no variation in it. And I think us as consumers, we've also been, we've gotten used to having perfect products. So not only the taste element, and our taste buds are changing because of ultra processed foods, but also the consistency of things, the way it crunches in our mouth. Those are all things which are very, very heavily researched. And having a natural product is something, it's a variable that these organizations, they typically try to avoid. So it's not only cost, but it's also the texture, the taste, what you can do with it. And that's actually an important point I just thought about. The petroleum gum, why many companies still like to use it, is because it's very strange. The formula itself, the taste, these things like the sweeteners and the flavorings, they can bind to the petroleum better, so the petroleum chemicals within it. So that's why the longevity of taste you'll find longer as well. So it's quite hard. So we've had a few customers saying, "Oh, the taste doesn't last as long as XYZ," and it's a price. I think it has to be paid. You can't find the perfect product because there are, like you said, there are costs associated with that. We can't compete with the petroleum product, and if the number one thing that people say is that they want a taste to last for 10, 20 minutes, and you're not going to find that all the time. There are mechanisms we can play around with that, which we're working on. But yeah, that's another thing I think that why these other bigger brands, they like to keep to the petroleum and these things as well.
Can you go into more detail to why it just sounds like a very obvious question, but why is the petroleum a problem? What's the main issue with it?
Well, I think number one, people don't know that it's made from petroleum, number one. And when you make them aware of it, they're like, oh gosh. So the idea, just the thought of you chewing on a piece of plastic, I think that doesn't really appeal to people. So it's been kind of covered up for a long time. They call it gum base. So we try to make it a bit clearer what a gum base is made from, but they don't have to say where it's made from. So a lot of people don't actually know. I think that's a problem for consumers. Number one, just the idea that it's from something that is unnatural. Number two is the natural environment side of things. The fact it's sourced from things that we should be avoiding. Petroleum, it's got obviously a quite bad rep right now, and the time it takes to biodegrade. And there has been some research out there about the effects of plastics, and we were talking about this earlier, on the human health, particularly being hormone disruptors. So they're disrupting the hormones in our body. And there was some research that was put into it, and they found that people who regularly chewed gum had elevated levels of this hormone disruptor in the body after chewing gum, and they couldn't quite pinpoint whether that was the gum itself or whether it was because it was stored in plastic packaging. But it's a risk I think that I would personally avoid taking, and that's again another reason why I created the brand. It's something I don't try to go on too much because again the research is somewhat limited, and I think to make bold statements like you're going to get higher levels of hormones and these things, I think just in itself to say that the gum base is made from petroleum, I think that's enough to put people off it.
Yeah, it's true. To chew on plastic or on petrol.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a desirable thing to do, is it? I think it was the UK government or the Dubai government. I heard a stat anyway, not that long ago, that was something like they spent £6 million every single year just cleaning the chewing gum off the streets. I was gobsmacked by that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge amount of money.
Yeah, I think it may have been higher. I've seen figures branded around like 60 million a year.
Wow.
Yeah, local governments in the UK cleaning it off the streets.
Does that mean if I'm driving chewing Kaigum, I can throw it out the window without an issue?
Arguably, yes. I mean, I probably don't want to be caught on camera saying start littering, but yeah,
I just needed to say that basically for my wife's benefit. Every time I do it, she's complains to me. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it degrades pretty quickly. So.
Yeah, you could argue it's the same as throwing a banana peel out the window. Yeah. I think the only thing is that going back to the point, and this is something that people have raised concern about, is people throwing out gum on the street, and especially made from xylitol, is bad if a dog comes across it and finds it. However, if you've been chewing it for about 10, 15 minutes, they found that 99 or 98% of the xylitol has come out of the gum itself. So it's not as much of a risk to dogs. So yeah, just be vigilant and, always put rubbish in the bin.
Yeah. Fair enough. Is that you politely telling me off?
Exactly.
What would you say is the most important aspect that we haven't talked about in regards to Kaigum so far?
Gosh, that is a good question, because I think we've covered off a lot of stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's primarily the nature, primarily the dental health. I would say probably the philosophy that drives the brand is probably a big area of it. I mean, I touched on the importance of the environment, think about the environment around us, the fact that we're very driven by science. So that's why and you probably picked up on this, that I've tried to avoid talking about all these benefits that have just, one novel piece of research was found on, focusing on very much the science side of things. And that's important. I'd say the thing that drives the brand as well is, and something that drives me is, I try and avoid fads. And sometimes we have this fad, and I won't name products out there, but they're doing it quite strongly. Very little research based upon it, and it's not something consistent. Whereas something with Kaigum I've always believed in is the power of small actions compounding to big results. So we talked a lot about the dental benefits, for example. The dental benefits can only be received by chewing 3 times a day after meals for about 15 minutes. In the UK, we need to say 20 minutes because that's what the research out there. But a lot of other research says there between 10 to 15 minutes is more than enough. So it's that consistency, the habit of coming in. So I was driven very much by Atomic Habits, the book, which I highly recommend if you haven't read it. It's those small actions that we do every day that compound to big results, rather than flash in the pan fads. It's so for me, yeah, I think that's another thing to really think about. A lot of the benefits that's found about reduction of plaque, reduction of tooth decay, those can only be achieved if you are doing it every day, 3 times a day. So that's why the xylitol levels are so high, because the research was around 4 to 6 grams need to be chewed 3 times a day. And the xylitol in many other products is so small that you're just not going to get those benefits. So yeah, I would say that's probably something else that's really important. If you're going to be getting the benefits from this product, it has to be consistent, and it's also a preventative. It's not going to stop. It's not going to stop you having a filling if you've already got a cavity there, a deep cavity. It can probably stop it getting worse. So yeah, that's why in Finland, for example, they give xylitol products to kids in school. And it's practice there. It's part of their recommendation of the dental organisation to prevent further problems further down the line. So I would say the one thing, going back to your question, is that consistency, making sure you're doing it. Similar to brushing your teeth every day and every evening, it's that consistency that you get the result. If you've got tooth decay, brushing your teeth suddenly is not going to stop it. It will stop it getting worse, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, of course, is that you couldn't just have the chewing gum after every meal and then suddenly your oral health is perfect. You need to, as you say, compound with other things. Correct. And I think that really applies with many other things. And that's why I find it quite hard with the research, because obviously with research, you want to change one variable and to see what that variable effect has on what you're looking for in regards to the outcome. But sometimes the outcome, the variable may not change, or the outcome may not change unless you're stacking many things together. And so with oral health, obviously, what I love about Kaigum and why I was drawn to it almost instantly is that it's something I can do that is outside of brushing my teeth. Because dentists always talk about flossing more, brushing more, using mouthwash or whatever it may be. But I always thought that it's literally just twice a day. What about the rest of the day? But it's also not to say that you could have a horrendous diet, eat sugar all day, and then a Kaigum's just going to magically sort it out. Like, you have to do everything, don't you?
Correct.
But it's just a great thing that you can add on top.
Yeah, it's the compounding benefits. And within Atomic Habits, I think they talked about it. It's all about marginal gains, and this is where the name comes from. Kaigum comes from kaizen, which is Japanese philosophy of small continuous improvement. So it's not these flash in the pan things. It's every day making tiny adjustments, looking for things. And I think the guy that really popularized marginal gains was Sir Ian Braithwaite, who was the Team GB cyclist coach. And they would do things, such small, tiny things. I think they changed the color of the paint inside the van that they were, when they were on the Tour de France, they were practicing in, because it had some effect, and it's so small and tiny changes to diet, and it had such small changes, but it compounded into big results. And yeah, I think it's very important. You touched on it there. It's Kaigum itself will not be the thing that you go to resolve all your dental problems. It has to be on top of things. The number one thing that's going to help your dental health is brushing. Firstly brushing, then it's going to be brushing twice a day. Then it's going to be thinking about flossing as well. Then it's your regular dental checkups. The Kaigum, you should be doing all of those things regardless. The Kaigum is just something on top. And where I saw that the thing that Kaigum could really help people out with is that we are feeding, going back to the bacteria and when we eat and drink and the acids we're creating, we're constantly attacking our teeth. My theory is that our teeth were not designed to take this amount of food and drinking every day. When we were, cavemen or whatever, you would eat probably once, twice a day. And there's some people even talking about how we would regularly fast and not used to this constant amount of food in our stomachs. And I think our teeth aren't used to that either. So we're constantly bombarding it with sugary things and carbohydrates and juices and coffees and all sorts. So this is something that you can do after those and basically keep your teeth healthy, get that saliva flow going.
Yeah, and when I think since having Kaigum, I don't think I've had a meal. Occasionally, I've had a meal if I've eaten out or something, but almost every time I will have it afterwards. It's quite easy to get into the habit of it, and I almost feel naked without it afterwards. Your mouth doesn't just feel as clean afterwards. So yeah, I can definitely highly recommend it. And I was somebody that never really got on with chewing gum. I think with me, if I can see a benefit to something, I can often motivate myself to do it. For example, I recently got into sauerkraut and I didn't like it initially. And now I absolutely love it. And this is so often the case with me that these things, if I try it initially, purely because I know it's good for me and not out of desire. It's not always something I like initially, but
yeah, I think the thing that keeps me going with it as well is like you said, after meals now, it's almost like something that I kind of need to have. And it's something, just that feeling of just the refreshed breath. It's the palate's cleansed somewhat. That for me is something that I now need, that feeling. And it's to have a net benefit is really positive as well.
yeah, that's brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Stephen. If someone would like to find out more about Kaigum, what's the best way of them doing that?
Yeah, so Instagram we have kai.gum, so Kaigum is our handle, or our website kaigum.com. We've got all the research out there that I mentioned and all the benefits, and obviously give us an email as well, info@kaigum.com, if you've got any questions.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put all those links in the description so people can find them. And yeah, once again, thank you so much, Stephen, for coming on.
Thank you, Steve.
Very, very insightful. And I'm a big fan of Kaigum.
Brilliant. That's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you, Stephen. Cheers.
Thank you.